I am Julian. I am 32 years old. For 11 straight years, I worked my hands to the bone, living like an absolute ghost in my own life, just to survive the financial craters my family kept leaving behind. And when I finally managed to buy one single piece of peace for myself, a small cabin tucked deep away in the Blue Ridge Mountains, my own flesh and blood tried to rip it right out of my hands. While I was standing on my own front porch, finally breathing clean air, my parents called to tell me I was a selfish, ungrateful son. They told me I was destroying the family. They laughed at my boundaries and encouraged my older brother to pack up his entire family, his extended in-laws, and just show up at my gate to take over my home. "You have the space, Julian," my mother said, her voice dripping with that familiar weaponized disappointment. "Your brother deserves a vacation after everything he's been through. Don't be so petty." They ridiculed me to anyone who would listen, claiming I was hoarding a luxury property while my own flesh and blood suffered in the city heat. But there is a massive detail they did not know. They thought I just bought a little 4-bedroom house in a managed community. They had absolutely no idea about the ironclad legal trap I had already set, or exactly how much of that mountain I actually owned. And right now, as they are facing a judge, begging for leniency and trying to avoid real jail time, they finally understand exactly who they pushed too far. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled my family's entitlement brick by brick, hit that like button if you believe that sometimes the only way to find peace is to burn the bridge. And don't forget to let me know what state or country you are watching from in the comments below. Now, let's go back to the exact moment the storm hit my front gates. It was exactly 2:17 on a Friday afternoon. The summer sun was baking the gravel on the access road, creating a shimmering heat wave right above the dirt. I was standing on the wraparound porch of my cabin, a heavy ceramic mug of black coffee cooling in my hand. From where I stood, elevated on the hillside, I had a perfect, unobstructed vantage point of the heavy iron security gates that protected our small 14-property community. The mountain air was dead quiet, save for the sound of a wood thrush somewhere in the eastern tree line. And then, the silence was violently broken by the crunching of tires and the revving of engines. 3 vehicles rolled up, completely blocking the entrance to the community. They did not pull off to the side. They parked right in the center of the lane, a physical manifestation of how they lived their lives, taking up space and expecting everyone else to maneuver around them. The first vehicle was my brother Marcus's oversized, pristine white SUV. It was a luxury vehicle he absolutely could not afford. A lease he kept rolling over just to maintain the illusion of his success. Behind him was his wife Elaine's minivan, packed to the roof with luggage, pool noodles, beach towels, and massive plastic coolers. And bringing up the rear was a third sedan I didn't even recognize. 11 people. I counted the silhouettes pressing against the tinted glass. My brother, his wife, their 3 loud and undisciplined kids, Elaine's sister, her kids, and God knows who else was crammed into that third car. They had driven 4 grueling hours from the city, fully expecting to roll right in, commandeer my bedrooms, raid my fridge, and treat me like their unpaid hospitality staff for the next 14 days. I watched Marcus step out of his SUV. Even from a distance of a quarter mile, I could see the arrogant swagger in his step. He was wearing expensive aviator sunglasses and a designer polo shirt, looking every bit the successful tech entrepreneur he desperately pretended to be. He walked up to the community call box, brushing dust off his shorts, probably expecting the heavy iron gates to magically park for him just because he existed. Instead, Mr. Harrison stepped out of his guard shack. Mr. Harrison is our community property manager. He is a retired military man, a veteran who runs this mountain association with the absolute precision of a drill sergeant. He had his clipboard in his hand, his posture completely rigid, his uniform immaculate despite the mountain heat. I had my phone in my pocket. It was turned completely off. I didn't need to hear it ring. I didn't need to see the notifications piling up. I knew exactly what was happening down there in the dust. Marcus started gesturing wildly. He pointed at the gate. He pointed at his car. He pointed up the mountain toward where he assumed my cabin was located. I could see Mr. Harrison simply shaking his head, a slow, methodical, unyielding shake. Then Elaine got out of the minivan. She slammed her door. She stood with her hands on her hips, her loud, piercing voice carrying faintly up the mountain breeze. She was used to getting her way. She was the kind of woman who would demand to speak to the manager at a grocery store just to feel a fleeting sense of power over a minimum wage worker. But Mr. Harrison wasn't a scared teenager working a cash register. He was a man who lived and breathed by the community bylaws, and those bylaws were very, very specific about unregistered guests attempting to access private property. Marcus pulled out his phone. I watched him dial furiously. He put the phone to his ear, pacing back and forth in front of the gate. Up on the porch, my pocket remained silent. I felt nothing. No anxiety, no guilt, no panic. My chest was not tight. I was not hyperventilating. For the first time in my entire adult life, watching my family melt down did not send my nervous system into a state of shock. I just watched them stand in the dust, completely locked out of the mountain paradise they thought they could just steal from me. Mr. Harrison lifted a walkie-talkie to his mouth. He unclipped it from his belt with a slow, deliberate motion. That was the signal. The moment he pressed that button, I knew Marcus had crossed the line from being an annoying relative to being an active trespasser. The police were being called. I took a slow sip of my coffee. It was perfectly bitter. I thought the worst was over. I thought they would scream at the gate for another 10 minutes, realize they were defeated, turn those 3 cars around, and drive 4 hours back to the city in humiliating silence. I was so incredibly wrong. They were not just going to leave, they were going to try to destroy me. To truly understand how we ended up in a standoff on a gravel road with the police on their way, you have to understand the 11 years of bleeding that came before it. You have to understand the deeply toxic dynamic of a family that functions entirely around the worship of a golden child. In my family, that golden idol was Marcus. Marcus is 6 years older than me, and from the day I was brought home from the hospital, I was nothing more than his shadow. Our parents, Eleanor and Arthur, worshipped the literal ground he walked on. Marcus was charismatic, he was loud, he was constantly full of what my parents called brilliant industry-disrupting ideas. He was going to be a Silicon Valley tech mogul. He was going to be a real estate tycoon. He was going to revolutionize whatever industry he happened to read a blog post about that morning. He never actually finished anything, but he sure knew how to talk about starting. I, on the other hand, was just Julian. Quiet, steady, unremarkable, background noise Julian. I didn't have big startup pitches. I didn't wear designer suits or lease cars that cost more than a down payment on a house. I liked working with my hands. I built a modest but highly specialized business restoring antique wood furniture and architectural salvage. I spent my days covered in sawdust, breathing in the smell of old varnish and aged oak. It wasn't glamorous. Nobody was writing magazine articles about my job, but it paid my salary reliably. Every single Friday, a paycheck hit my bank account. But in my family, steady meant boring. Boring meant invisible. And invisible meant I existed only to be useful. Over the span of a decade, Marcus launched and crashed 4 different businesses. Every single time, the fallout was catastrophic. And every single time, my parents stepped in to shield him from the consequences of his own arrogance. When Marcus blew through his own college fund partying and networking, my parents quietly drained my college fund to pay off his ballooning business loans. I found out when I was 17, sitting at the kitchen table holding a college acceptance letter I suddenly couldn't afford. My father just patted my shoulder and said, "You're a smart boy, Julian. You can work your way through community college. Your brother is on the verge of a breakthrough. We have to support his vision." When his second company folded, my father dipped heavily into his 401k retirement account to keep Marcus's massive suburban house from going into foreclosure. They mortgaged their future to protect his present. And me? I became the permanent safety net. Whenever Marcus failed, I was expected to pick up the financial and emotional slack. "Family helps family, Julian," my mother would say. I can vividly remember Thanksgiving dinners where Marcus sat at the head of the table pouring expensive wine he didn't pay for, talking loudly about his next big venture. My parents would look at him with shining eyes. Meanwhile, I was quietly slipping my credit card to my mother in the kitchen to pay the electric bill for their house because they had given all their cash liquidity to him. I worked double shifts. I took on weekend restoration jobs that destroyed my lower back. I drove a beat-up 1998 truck with a cracked windshield for 10 years, while Marcus leased luxury cars to project success to his investors. I ate cheap ramen noodles at my workbench while looking at Instagram photos of Marcus and Elaine eating at five-star steakhouses. But I had a secret. When my grandmother passed away, she left a modest inheritance because she saw exactly what my parents were doing. She bypassed them completely and left the money in a trust that transferred directly to me when I turned 21. It wasn't millions, but it was enough. I never touched a single dime of it. I hid it in an obscure banking account my parents didn't know existed. I guarded it like a dragon sleeping on a single gold coin. I knew with absolute certainty that if they ever found out about that money, it would vanish into Marcus's bottomless pit of debt within a week. They would cry, they would beg, they would call me a monster, and they would take it. I spent 11 years absorbing, accommodating, and deferring. I let them treat me like a secondary character in the grand movie of Marcus's life. I managed their feelings. I swallowed my pride. But something fundamental shifted in me when I hit my early 30s. The exhaustion stopped being just physical, settled deep into my bones. I woke up one morning, looked at the ceiling of my cheap apartment, and realized with terrifying clarity that if I didn't stop them, they would consume my entire life. I would wake up at 60 years old with a broken back, an empty bank account, and a family that still expected more. I needed a sanctuary. I needed a physical fortress where my phone didn't ring with demands for money, where I didn't have to justify my existence. That's when I found the cabin. It had been sitting on the market for 94 days. The real estate market in the mountains was slow, and the property needed a little work. But it was 4 beautiful bedrooms, surrounded by 50 acres of old-growth timber, with a crystal-clear creek running right through the eastern edge of the property. The moment I drove my old truck up the gravel road and stepped onto that wraparound porch, I felt my shoulders drop. I breathed in the smell of pine and damp earth, and for the first time in a decade, my jaw unclenched. I bought it entirely in secret. Every dollar came from my grandmother's inheritance and 11 years of aggressive, painful saving. No cosigners, no family loans, no bank mortgages. I bought it in cash. Just me. I remember the Thursday morning I sat in the title office to sign the closing documents. The notary was a woman in her late 60s with kind, perceptive eyes. She watched me meticulously read every single page. As she stamped the final document, she looked up, slid the heavy stack of paperwork across the mahogany desk, and smiled warmly. "Congratulations, Julian," she said, her voice soft but firm. "This is a big deal. Buying a property like this outright? You should be incredibly proud of yourself." I actually had to look down at my hands because my eyes burned with sudden tears. I wasn't ready for that. It was the very first time in my adult life that someone had acknowledged my hard work without immediately following it up with a request for a favor. For the first 2 months, it was absolute paradise. I spent every single weekend up there. I painted the walls. I fixed the plumbing under the kitchen sink. I sat on the porch and listened to the water. I slept through the night without waking up in a cold sweat about my parents' mortgage. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell Marcus. I existed in a perfect, silent bubble. But holding on to a secret that massive is heavy. You want to share your joy. You want someone to be proud of you. And eventually, the isolation chipped away at my judgment. I made a massive, catastrophic mistake. I confided in my Aunt Clara. Clara was my mother's sister, but she had always seemed different, slightly removed from the family cult of Marcus. She used to sneak me $20 bills when I was a teenager. She used to tell me I was a hard worker. I thought she saw me. I truly believed she understood the deep unfairness of how my parents treated me. One Sunday morning, over a cup of black coffee and a plate of eggs at a local diner, I broke down and told her. I told her I bought a house in the mountains. I pulled out my phone and showed her a picture of the creek, of the porch, of the morning fog rolling over the trees. I told her how incredibly peaceful it was to finally have something that belonged entirely to me. Clara smiled. She reached across the sticky diner table, patted my hand, and told me she was so happy for me. She told me I deserved it. She wiped a tear from her eye. I should have known better. In a toxic family system, there are no neutral parties. Everyone is a cog in the machine. I drove back to my apartment that afternoon feeling lighter, thinking I finally had a family ally. I didn't realize I had just handed the enemy the exact GPS coordinates to my hidden fortress. The illusion of peace shattered exactly 3 days later. It didn't fade away slowly. It exploded like a bomb in my living room. It was a Tuesday evening. I was sitting at the small desk in my city apartment, going over some complex invoices for my restoration business, trying to match receipts. The apartment was quiet. Then, my phone vibrated violently against the wood. The screen lit up in the dim room. The caller ID flashed Marcus's name. My stomach instantly tightened into a familiar, painful, agonizing knot. My heart rate spiked. Marcus never called just to chat. Marcus never called to ask how my day was. Marcus called when he needed money, when he needed a co-signer for a loan he was going to default on, or when he needed free labor to move furniture out of his latest failed office space. I stared at the phone. I let it ring 3 times before I picked up, bracing every muscle in my body. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice as flat and neutral as possible. "Julian, little brother." His voice was booming through the speaker, practically vibrating with that artificial high-octane salesman energy he always used when he was about to bulldoze someone. "How's the new mountain retreat? You've been holding out on us, man. Sneaky, sneaky." The blood rushed out of my head so fast I felt dizzy. I froze. The air in my apartment suddenly felt incredibly thin. "Who told you?" "Oh, Aunt Clara let it slip to Mom, and Mom told me," Marcus said, laughing loudly. It was that easy breezy laugh that meant he was already taking ownership of my life. "Honestly, I'm a little hurt you didn't tell us, but it's fine. It actually works out perfectly. Listen, Elaine and I were looking for a place to take the kids for the summer. Those rental prices on Airbnb are absolutely insane right now. And then Mom calls and tells us you've got a massive 4-bedroom place just sitting empty up in the woods." He didn't even pause for a breath. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask how I managed to afford a house on a restore salary. He didn't congratulate me. He just pivoted immediately to how my grueling 11-year achievement could serve his immediate comfort. "So, here's the plan. We're coming up next Friday," Marcus declared, his tone leaving absolutely no room for discussion. "It'll be me, Elaine, the 3 kids. Oh, and Elaine's sister is visiting from out of state, so she's bringing her 2 kids too. And Leo, Elaine's brother, might come up for the weekend. It'll be great. A real family reunion in nature. Make sure the fridge is stocked, okay? The kids are super picky eaters right now. Elaine will text you a grocery list tomorrow, so you can hit the store before we get there." I sat perfectly still, staring blankly at the grain of my wooden desk. My mind was trying to process the sheer, unadulterated audacity of his words. 11 people. He was inviting 11 people to a house he had never seen, a house he did not own, a house he had not contributed a single penny toward. And he was giving me a grocery list. He fully expected me to fund their 2-week vacation, cook their meals, clean up after his chaotic kids, and probably sleep on the living room sofa in my own home while he and Elaine took the master bedroom. "Marcus," I said, my voice sounding strangely hollow to my own ears. That's a lot of people. I'm not really set up for guests right now. The house isn't ready." "Oh, stop being so dramatic," he scoffed, the friendly tone instantly dropping into a sharp annoyance. "It's a house, Julian. It has walls and a roof. We bring sleeping bags for the kids. It's not a big deal. Family shares. Don't be selfish when you're sitting on a gold mine." Don't be selfish. There it was, the family motto, the ultimate weapon they had used to keep me in line, to keep me small, to keep me bleeding out for them for over a decade. "I'll think about it," I said quietly, gripping the edge of the desk. "There's nothing to think about, Julian. We'll be there around 2 on Friday. Leave the gate code with the guard so we don't have to wait." He hung up, just like that. The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone. My hands were shaking, but it wasn't from fear. It wasn't from that old, familiar panic of how I was going to afford this. It was from a sudden, blinding, white-hot rage. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. It was Aunt Clara. I answered it. "Hello?" "Julian, honey," she said, her voice dripping with fake, syrupy sweetness. "I heard you talk to your brother. I'm so glad. It's going to be so good for all of you to spend time together. You know how stressed Marcus has been with his latest project failing? He needs a break in nature." "You told him?" I said, my voice dead flat. "I asked you to keep it between us, Clara. I looked you in the eye and asked you not to say anything." "Now, Julian," she sighed, using that patronizing tone adults use to scold unreasonable toddlers, "you can't hide a whole house from your family. That's just deceptive. Besides, he really needed a win. And to be perfectly honest, I sent him the GPS coordinates from that picture you showed me. He's your brother. You owe him a little grace." She sent him the coordinates. Something inside me, some old, rusty, heavy chain that had kept me tethered to this family's toxic expectations, the chain that made me believe I owed them my life, finally snapped. It was a clean, sharp, violent break. The Julian who would have panicked, cleaned the house, bought the groceries, and absorbed the abuse was gone. He died right there at that desk. I didn't yell at Clara. I didn't argue. I didn't explain my feelings. I simply pulled the phone away from my ear, pressed end call, and blocked her number. Then I opened a text message to Marcus. I didn't hedge. I didn't apologize. I typed exactly 3 sentences. "I am not ready to have guests. The property is not available next week. Do not drive up here." I hit send. And then I started making preparations for war. The fallout was immediate, violent, and predictable. Within 30 seconds of me hitting send on that text message, Marcus called. I watched his face flash on the screen. I ignored it. He called again. Ignored. Then came the barrage of text messages, lighting up my phone like a slot machine. "What the hell is wrong with you? Elaine already packed the kids' bags. You're ruining their entire summer, you selfish piece of garbage. Call me back right now or I'm calling Mom." I didn't respond. I put my phone on silent, turned it face down on the desk, and let the poison collect in the dark. By the time the sun came up the next morning, my parents had been fully activated as his attack dogs. My mother left a 5-minute voicemail weaponizing every single bit of guilt she had ever installed in my brain since childhood. She told me I was arrogant. She told me that having a little bit of money had changed me into a cold, heartless monster. She brought up the times they had fed and clothed me as a child, as if basic parenting was a financial debt I had to repay by letting Marcus hijack my real estate. My father sent a single, icy text message that was meant to cut me to the bone. "Disappointed in the man you've become. Fix this with your brother immediately, or don't bother coming to Thanksgiving." I read the text. I felt a brief pang of grief for the parents I wished I had, and then I deleted the message. I didn't reply to any of them. I was too busy executing a legal and physical defense plan. The first thing I did was drive to the downtown offices of Victoria Sterling. Victoria was a high-end real estate lawyer who had a reputation in the county for being absolutely ruthless. I didn't want a family mediator. I wanted a legal shark. I walked into her sleek, glass-walled office, sat down at her massive conference table, and laid out every single document I had. The deed, the HOA community bylaws, the title insurance, the text messages. She reviewed them in complete silence, her pen tapping rhythmically against the mahogany desk. "My brother is going to try to force his way onto my property this Friday," I told her plainly, looking her dead in the eye. "He believes family ties override property laws. I need to ensure he learns the difference the hard way." Victoria looked up, a sharp, approving glint in her eyes. "Mr. Harrison manages your community gate, correct? The retired military man." "Yes." "Good. Harrison doesn't play games with unauthorized access," she said. She leaned forward, interlacing her fingers. "We are going to draft a formal cease and desist letter right now, but we aren't going to mail it yet. Mailing it gives him time to pivot. If he shows up on Friday, he will be trespassing. If he tries to force entry past the gate, it becomes a criminal matter. Are you prepared to press criminal charges against your own brother, Julian?" "Without hesitation," I said, and I meant every single syllable. I left Victoria's office feeling like I was wearing armor. I drove straight up the mountain to meet with Mr. Harrison in person. We stood inside his air-conditioned guard shack, reviewing the community guidelines line by line. Any non-owner guests staying more than 72 hours had to be registered in advance. Any guest arriving without the owner present in the vehicle required explicit written same-day consent submitted to the management office. "I am officially notifying you, Mr. Harrison, that I have 0 authorized guests for the foreseeable future," I told him. "If anyone claiming to be my family shows up here on Friday, deny them entry. Do not let them intimidate you. Do not call me to ask for an exception." Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses, looking at me with a newfound respect. "I've been doing this job for 16 years, Julian. Nobody intimidates me on my gate. If they refuse to leave, I call the sheriff." "Thank you." I felt a profound sense of security. I had built the walls. I had manned the gates. But later that night, I discovered just how far Marcus's delusion and greed had actually gone. I was lying on the leather couch at my cabin, scrolling mindlessly on my laptop to wind down, when I decided to check Elaine's Facebook page. We weren't friends on the platform, but her profile was entirely public because she fancied herself a lifestyle influencer. Right at the top of her feed, pinned for everyone to see, was a post that made the blood in my veins run ice cold. It was a heavily filtered, beautifully lit photo of my cabin, the exact picture Aunt Clara must have taken when I showed her my phone at the diner. The caption read, "So excited to announce our brand new family business venture. Marcus and I are launching a luxury eco-retreat in the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains. Limited spots available for summer bookings. DM for investment opportunities and early bird rental rates. We can't wait to host you. Hashtag boss babe, hashtag real estate, hashtag mountain life, hashtag investment." I stared at the screen, my mind struggling to process the sheer scale of the audacity. Marcus wasn't just coming up here for a free family vacation. He was using a stolen photograph of my home to solicit investment money from his network for another fake startup. He was actively selling spots to a house he didn't own, didn't have access to, and hadn't paid a dime for. He was trying to turn my sanctuary into his personal cash cow to recover from his last bankruptcy. He was planning to bring those 11 people up here to shoot promotional materials for his fraud. A cold, hard, terrifying calm washed over me. Any lingering guilt I had about shutting my family out evaporated entirely into the mountain air. They weren't family. They were parasites looking for a new host. I took screenshots of everything. I captured the post, the comments from people asking for prices, and the direct messages she was replying to in the public thread. I compiled all of it into a secure digital folder and emailed it directly to Victoria Sterling with the subject line, "Evidence of Fraud." I spent Thursday night sleeping better than I had in a decade. I woke up on Friday morning, brewed a pot of coffee, and walked out onto the porch. I watched the gravel road. I listened to the wind rushing through the 50 acres of pine trees that belonged entirely to me, and I waited for the storm to arrive at my front gate. knowing perfectly well that I was the one holding the lightning. The mountain dust was still settling in a thick, hazy cloud over the gravel when I saw Marcus reach into the passenger side of his pristine white Porsche SUV. He was no longer just grabbing his smartphone to angrily dial my number again. He was pulling out a thick manila folder. Even from my vantage point up on the porch, a quarter-mile away, I could clearly see the stiff, deeply arrogant set of his shoulders. He slammed his car door, walked purposefully back to Mr. Harrison's guard shack, slapped the folder against the metal call box, and pulled out a heavy stack of paper. He was smiling. I could see the flash of his teeth even from this distance. It was that sickening, completely self-satisfied smirk he always wore at family gatherings when he thought he had outsmarted the entire room. It was the exact same expression he had on his face 10 years ago when he convinced my parents to drain my college fund to cover his second failed business venture. I did not need a pair of binoculars to know exactly what was inside that manila folder. That was his ultimate trump card. That was the fake deed, the forged notice of interest claiming he was a primary financial partner and investor in my mountain property. He had actually done it. My own brother had manufactured a completely fraudulent legal document, forged my signature with terrifying confidence, and brought it to a physical confrontation at my front gate. He fully believed that my lifelong habit of backing down, my history of absorbing his abuse to keep the peace, would magically validate his felony fraud. He honestly thought the sheer weight of his booming voice and his manufactured confidence would make the lie become the truth. I turned my back on the valley. I walked slowly back inside the cabin. The central air conditioning was humming quietly, keeping the heavy July humidity completely at bay. I walked into the kitchen, picked up my heavy brass keys from the granite island, grabbed a cold bottle of water from the refrigerator, and walked out the back door to where my old, reliable restoration truck was parked. I did not rush. I did not run. I started the engine, put the transmission into gear, and began the slow, winding drive down the steep access road toward the main security gate. By the time the tires of my truck hit the flat stretch of gravel behind Mr. Harrison's shack, the situation had rapidly escalated from a tense family dispute into a massive public spectacle. Marcus was yelling at the top of his lungs. Elaine was standing aggressively next to him, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, actively recording Mr. Harrison on her latest smartphone. Behind them, Oliver, Marcus's 16-year-old son, was leaning against the polished hood of the Porsche, glaring at the security guard like he owned the entire mountain range. The other younger children were whining loudly in the back of the minivan. The sliding side doors were wide open, spilling the oppressive thick summer heat directly into their air-conditioned bubble, making them even more miserable. And pulling up right behind their ridiculous three-car blockade was Officer Miller from the county sheriff's department. The heavy police cruiser's lights were flashing silently, casting harsh, rhythmic blue and red reflections against the dark iron of the community gates and the surrounding pine trees. I put my truck in park, stepped out onto the gravel, and leaned comfortably against the doorframe of my vehicle. I did not say a single word. I did not announce my presence. I just crossed my arms and watched the chaos unfold. Finally, Marcus threw his hands dramatically into the air as Officer Miller approached the group. "Officer, thank God you are here. This rent-a-cop is holding my family hostage on a public road. I am a legal part owner of the real estate property up that hill, and this man is illegally restricting our access. I want him moved immediately." Officer Miller was a tall, heavily built man with a thick mustache who looked like he had absolutely zero patience for wealthy city tourists bringing their manufactured drama into his quiet jurisdiction. He hooked his thumbs slowly into his heavy leather duty belt and looked critically at the three vehicles completely blocking the fire entrance. "Nobody is holding you hostage, sir," Officer Miller said, his voice a low, authoritative rumble. "You are entirely free to get back into your vehicles, turn them around, and leave the area. You are, however, currently blocking an emergency fire lane, which is a citable offense." "I am absolutely not leaving," Marcus snapped, taking a step forward and aggressively shoving the manila folder toward the officer's chest.
I have the official paperwork right here.
My younger brother bought this property, but I contributed the heavy capital for the down payment and the renovations. We are legal co-owners. My name is right there on the notice of interest. This is a private family dispute, and this security guard is overstepping his legal bounds. I want him cited for harassment, and I want those iron gates opened immediately." Elaine chimed in, stepping closer and pointing her phone directly at the officer's face. We drove 4 agonizing hours from the city with hungry, exhausted children. This is emotional abuse. Julian is up there hiding in that cabin like a complete coward, while his own family suffers out here in the heat. We have fundamental legal rights to access this house. We are missing valuable time from our vacation. Officer Miller took the stack of papers from Marcus. He frowned deeply, pulling a pair of reading glasses from his uniform pocket and scanning the dense legal text. For a split second, a cold, sharp sliver of doubt tried to creep into my mind. What if the forgery was genuinely good? What if the notary seal looked perfectly authentic? What if the officer simply decided this was a civil court matter, shrugged his shoulders and told Mr. Harrison to let them through just to avoid a massive scene on a Friday afternoon? That was exactly the scenario Marcus was banking his entire plan on. He was banking heavily on the path of least resistance. He knew police departments hated dealing with convoluted family real estate squabbles. He thought he could easily bully his way onto my porch, and he knew that once his kids had their suitcases unpacked in my guest bedrooms, it would take months of brutal legal battles and thousands of dollars in lawyer fees to formally evict him. "Mr. Harrison," Officer Miller said, slowly looking up from the fraudulent document, "this paperwork looks like a notarized claim of interest. It explicitly lists Marcus here as a major financial contributor to the real estate asset. Do you have contradictory instructions from the primary deed holder regarding access?" Mr. Harrison looked directly over the police officer's broad shoulder and locked eyes with me. He gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. "I have direct verbal and written instructions from the sole owner of the property, Julian. No guests, no extended family. Absolutely no exceptions under any circumstances." Marcus finally turned his head. He saw me standing quietly by my dusty work truck. His face instantly lit up with a predatory, victorious grin. He thought he had me completely cornered. He thought the heavy presence of law enforcement, his screaming wife, the crying children, and the official-looking paperwork would instantly trigger my lifelong psychological conditioning. He expected me to just submit, apologize, and make the peace. "Julian!" Marcus yelled, walking aggressively toward the gate, gripping the thick iron bars with both hands. "Tell this idiot security guard to open the damn gate. This pathetic joke has gone on long enough. Mom is going to have a literal heart attack when she hears what you are putting your own family through. Open the gate. Let us unpack our luggage, and we can talk about your little attitude problem inside over a beer." He was still doing it. Standing there with a forged felony document in the hands of an armed police officer, he was still talking to me like I was a disobedient teenager who had forgotten my assigned place in the family hierarchy. He was completely blind to the terrifying reality of the situation because his entitlement was absolute. I reached into my truck, took a slow drink from my water bottle, and capped it tightly. I looked at Marcus. I looked at Elaine's furious red face, and then I looked at the bewildered, deeply uncomfortable faces of Elaine's extended family sitting silently in the third car. "I am not opening the gate, Marcus," I said, my voice carrying clearly and calmly in the quiet mountain air. "And you are never coming inside." "I have the legal paperwork, Julian!" Marcus screamed, his face turning an ugly, mottled shade of purple. He pointed frantically at the officer. "I have the signed financial agreement. You cannot just lock me out of my own investment. Officer, tell him to open the gate." Officer Miller looked at me, his expression hardening. "Sir, are you Julian? Is this your authentic signature on this document, acknowledging his massive financial stake in this real estate?" I didn't even get a chance to open my mouth to answer him, because at that exact perfect moment, a sleek, jet-black Mercedes sedan pulled up quietly behind the flashing police cruiser. The driver's side door opened smoothly, and a pair of expensive black heels stepped firmly onto the gravel. Victoria Sterling had arrived, and she brought the absolute legal apocalypse with her. Victoria Sterling adjusted the collar of her immaculate designer blazer, picked up her heavy leather briefcase from the passenger seat, and walked past the ridiculous blockade of minivans and luxury SUVs with the terrifying, unshakable confidence of a woman who destroyed arrogant men for a living. She did not even glance at Marcus. She completely ignored Elaine's recording phone. She walked straight up to Officer Miller, extending a hand and handing him a glossy, heavy-stock business card. "Officer Miller, good afternoon. I apologize for the disruption to your patrol. I am Victoria Sterling, senior partner at Sterling and Hayes Real Estate Law in the city. I represent Julian." She finally turned her sharp, calculating gaze to Marcus, looking him up and down like he was an interesting smear of dirt on the asphalt. "And I firmly believe you are currently holding a fraudulent document, manufactured entirely by this man." Marcus burst out laughing, but it was a high-pitched, incredibly nervous sound that lacked any real conviction. "Fraudulent? Are you completely insane, lady? That is a legally notarized agreement. It has my brother's signature right on the bottom line. He signed it last month when I handed him $20,000 in hard cash to cover his plumbing renovations." He lied so effortlessly. He spun a fictional $20,000 cash investment completely out of thin air while standing 3 feet away from a sworn police officer. It was almost impressive to witness, if it wasn't so profoundly pathetic. "A notarized agreement," Victoria repeated, tasting the words. Her voice perfectly smooth and deadly calm. She clicked open the brass latches of her briefcase and pulled out a thick, impeccably bound legal file. "That is absolutely fascinating, Marcus, because the official notary stamp on your little document belongs to a Mr. David Chun, whose office is located in the financial district. I had a very illuminating phone conversation with Mr. Chun early this morning. He confirmed that he did, in fact, stamp a document for you this past Tuesday. However, he also gladly provided my office with the high-definition security camera footage from his waiting room. That footage clearly shows you walking into his establishment with a man who is most certainly not my client, Julian, to sign that piece of paper." The color completely and instantly drained from Marcus's face. The arrogant, predatory smirk vanished, replaced by slack-jawed, terrified expression of a man who suddenly realizes he just stepped confidently off a massive cliff in the pitch dark. "Furthermore," Victoria continued, her voice rising slightly to command the absolute attention of everyone present. She handed a thick stack of bank-certified papers directly to Officer Miller. "I have sworn, notarized affidavits from Julian's primary bank, proving definitively that every single dollar used to purchase this mountain property came directly from a sole private inheritance trust left by his late grandmother. Marcus has never contributed a single dime to my client's accounts, nor has he ever paid a salary, a bill, or a mortgage for my client. That document you are holding, officer, is a crude forgery. Presenting it constitutes felony fraud, identity theft, and the criminal act of attempting to file a false instrument to steal real estate." Elaine slowly lowered her smartphone. Her mouth was hanging open in shock. She looked wildly from Victoria to her husband Marcus and back to the terrifying lawyer. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice trembling violently. "What in God's name is she talking about? You swore to me you bought into the house. You showed me the bank transfers." "Shut up, Elaine. Just shut up," Marcus snapped, sheer panic finally bleeding through his crumbling facade. He turned back to the police officer, holding his hands up defensively. "This is a massive misunderstanding. It's a complicated family business deal. My brother is just confused. We can sort this out civilly in a boardroom. Just tell this guard to open the gate so we can get our crying kids out of this unbearable heat, and we'll hash out the legal paperwork inside over dinner." He was still desperately trying to get past the iron gate, even caught red-handed in a major felony lie with a lawyer standing right in front of him. His core instinct was to push forward and physically occupy my space. "Oh, you definitely aren't going inside," Victoria said, a cold, merciless smile touching the corners of her mouth. In fact, you need to step back, right now. Or what? Marcus sneered, puffing out his chest, desperately trying to recover his shattered bravado in front of his wife's family. I'm standing on a public county access road. You can't touch me out here, lady. My tax dollars pay for this gravel. This was the exact moment. This was the crushing trap I had spent the last 48 hours perfectly setting with Victoria. I walked forward from my truck until I was standing directly on the other side of the heavy iron gate, mere inches from Marcus's sweating face. "Marcus," I said softly, looking deep into his panicked eyes, "did you actually bother to look at the public property and zoning records before you drove 4 hours up a mountain? Or did you just look at the pretty picture Aunt Clara took on her iPhone?" He blinked, visibly confused, his breath coming short. "What the hell are you talking about?" Victoria opened the final, thickest section of her legal file. She held up a massive, fold-out surveyor's map with bright red boundary lines drawn aggressively over the topography. "My client didn't just buy the little 4-bedroom cabin within the homeowners association," Victoria announced, her voice echoing sharply off the surrounding pine trees. "He purchased the entire 50-acre parcel of undeveloped virgin forest that completely surrounds this community. And as part of that massive acquisition, he bought the private access road you are currently parked on." I watched Marcus's eyes drop slowly to the dusty gravel beneath his expensive Italian loafers. The public county road ended exactly 1 full mile back at the highway turnoff. Victoria explained, enunciating every single syllable for maximum psychological impact. "The gate you are standing in front of, that belongs to the HOA. But the dirt you are standing on, the dirt your luxury cars are currently leaking oil onto, that belongs exclusively to Julian, which means you are not standing on a public road. Marcus, you are actively, criminally trespassing on my client's private property." The silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. The only sound in the entire valley was the low, steady hum of the police cruiser's engine and the distant cry of a bird. "You're lying," Marcus breathed, shaking his head side to side. "That's completely impossible. Julian restores old furniture. He doesn't have that kind of massive capital. He doesn't have real estate money." "He absolutely does," I said, my voice like steel, "because I didn't spend the last 11 agonizing years leasing Porsches I couldn't afford, throwing fake startup networking parties, and draining our parents' retirement accounts." Victoria wasn't finished. She reached into her briefcase one last time and pulled out the high-quality color-printed screenshots from Elaine's public Facebook page. "And this, officer, is the final piece of business. We have documented, time-stamped evidence that this man and his wife are actively soliciting heavy investment funds online for a fictional luxury eco-retreat using stolen photographs of my client's private residence. You are illegally selling summer bookings for a property you do not own, utilizing a forged real estate deed to legitimize a massive financial scam to your investors." Officer Miller had heard more than enough. He decisively closed the manila folder Marcus had handed him. He unclipped the heavy radio microphone from his shoulder. "Dispatch, I'm going to need a second unit out here at the Blue Ridge Community Gate immediately. I have an adult male suspect I'm taking into full custody for suspected felony fraud, document forgery, and criminal trespassing." Wait. Marcus threw his hands up in the air, stumbling backward away from the advancing officer. Julian, tell him to stop. This is insane. I'm your older brother. You can't let him arrest me. Think about Mom. Think about what a lawsuit will do to the family name." "I am thinking about Mom," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "I'm thinking about how she's going to have to find someone else's electric bill to pay this month because her golden child is going to jail." Officer Miller stepped forward rapidly, grabbing Marcus firmly by the bicep. "Sir, put your hands behind your back right now. Do not resist." "Julian!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking horribly as the large officer easily spun him around and pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his utility belt. The metallic click of the cuffs locking into place echoed like a gunshot in the canyon. "You're destroying the family! You're a sociopath! I'll take full custody of everything you own when I sue you." "No, Marcus," I said, looking at him as he was pressed roughly against the burning hot hood of his own leased Porsche. "I'm just finally protecting my habitat from predators." The sight of Marcus, the untouchable golden child, the brilliant entrepreneur of the family, suddenly violently pressed against the hood of a car in handcuffs, completely shattered the "thee" of everyone standing on that gravel road. Elaine dropped her smartphone. It hit the dirt with a dull thud, the screen instantly shattering. She didn't even try to reach down and pick it up. She covered her mouth with both of her manicured hands, letting out a piercing, hysterical wail that sounded like a wounded animal. She rushed frantically toward Officer Miller, her expensive makeup instantly ruined by a flood of terrified tears. "You can't arrest him. You don't understand. He's a highly respected businessman," Elaine shrieked, clawing at the air. "We have massive investors waiting on us. We have small children in the car watching this. Julian, please. I'm so sorry. Tell them to let him go. We'll turn around and leave right now. We'll never come back." "Ma'am, I strongly advise you to step back," Officer Miller warned, holding his free hand up in a universal gesture to stop. "If you interfere with a lawful felony arrest, you will be in the back of the cruiser heading to the county jail right next to him. Do you understand me?" Elaine froze instantly. The threat of actual, tangible legal consequences was something she had never faced in her entirely privileged life. She spun around to face me through the iron bars of the gate. "Julian, please. How could you possibly do this to your own flesh and blood? Over a stupid house? Have you lost your mind?" "It was never about the house, Elaine," I said quietly, watching her world collapse. "It was about the forgery. It was about the absolute disrespect. It was about the fact that you two were so incredibly comfortable stealing from me that you honestly thought you could build a fake business empire on my property without even asking my permission. Get in your minivan. Turn your cars around. Leave my mountain." At that exact moment, the passenger door of the third sedan opened. Leo, Elaine's younger brother, stepped out into the heat. I had met Leo maybe twice in my entire life, mostly briefly at terrible Thanksgiving dinners. He always seemed quiet, totally overshadowed by Elaine's massive, overbearing personality. He walked slowly past the minivan, looking at the crying children in the back seat, looking at Marcus sweating in handcuffs, and finally looking closely at the printed Facebook screenshots Victoria Sterling was still holding in her hands. Leo stopped dead in front of his sister. He looked physically sick to his stomach. "Elaine," he said, his voice trembling with a deep, furious anger. "You told me he invited us up here. You sat at my dining room table and told me Marcus put the heavy down payment on this place and Julian was just managing the property for him." Elaine couldn't even look her own brother in the eye. She stared down at the dirt, sobbing uncontrollably, her shoulders shaking violently. "You completely lied to me," Leo said, his voice rising in volume. "You dragged me and my innocent kids 4 hours up a mountain to help you illegally squat in a house you were actively trying to steal." He turned to me, his face pale and drained of color. "Julian, man, I had absolutely no idea. I swear to God on my life. If I had known what they were doing to you, I never would have gotten in that car." "I believe you, Leo," I said, giving him a small nod. "Take your car. Get your kids out of here right now. Leave them behind." Leo did not hesitate for a single second. He turned his back completely on his sister, walked straight to his sedan, told his terrified wife to lock the doors, and backed rapidly out of the fire lane, kicking up a massive cloud of dust. He left Elaine standing alone in the road, watching her entire fake empire crumble into absolute pieces. By the time the second police cruiser finally arrived, the fight was completely drained out of Marcus. He was sweating profusely, his expensive designer shirt clinging wetly to his back. He wouldn't even look at me as the deputies placed him roughly into the back of the patrol car. He just stared blankly at the floorboards, finally trapped in a harsh reality he couldn't talk his way out of. Victoria turned to me, closing her briefcase with a satisfying snap. I need to follow the officers down to the county station to formally file the complaint and submit the evidence to the district attorney. Do you want to come with me, Julian? Yes, I said, feeling lighter than air. I want to finish this entirely today. I drove my truck slowly down the mountain, following the flashing lights of the police cruisers. The drive was completely silent. I didn't turn on the radio. I just let the profound, heavy peace of the forest wash over me. I had finally cut the cancer out of my life. It was incredibly painful, it was messy, and it was loud. But I was finally breathing free air. At the county station, it took over 3 grueling hours to fully process the legal paperwork. Marcus was formally booked on felony forgery, attempted financial fraud, and criminal trespassing. Because he had a massive previous history of unpaid civil judgments and lawsuits from his endless failed businesses, the strict magistrate denied him immediate release on his own recognizance. He was going to spend the entire weekend sitting in a cold concrete cell, wearing a bright orange county jumpsuit, waiting for a Monday morning bail hearing. While I was standing at the front desk signing my sworn statement, my phone rang. It was my mother. The news had obviously reached her back in the city. I didn't decline the call. I answered it. I put it on speakerphone and set it flat on the wooden counter for Victoria and the desk sergeant to hear. "Julian!" my mother screamed, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated hysteria. "What have you done? Elaine just called me sobbing. She said Marcus is in jail. Tell them it's a massive mistake. Tell the police to let him go right now." "It's not a mistake, Mom," I said, my voice completely steady and even. "He forged my signature on a legal real estate document to steal my property. He broke the law. He committed a felony." "He is your brother!" she shrieked, sobbing loudly into the receiver. "You are tearing this family apart! How can you be so incredibly cruel? He has a wife. He has 3 kids. If he gets a felony, he'll never get another promotion or investment. You need to go to that police station and pay his bail right this second, Julian. Do you hear me? I am your mother and I am ordering you." "I'm not paying his bail, Mom," I said, staring at the concrete wall. "I'm never paying for his mistakes again. And if you or Dad ever try to drive up to my property, I will have you arrested for criminal trespassing too." "You are dead to me," she screamed, her voice echoing in the quiet police lobby. "Do you hear me? You are dead." "I know," I said softly. "I have been dead to you for 11 years. I hung up the phone. I didn't block her number quite yet. I wanted the heavy silence that followed to be her agonizing choice. I walked out of the police station with Victoria, stepped into the warm evening mountain air, and for the very first time in my entire adult life, I looked forward to the future. It has been exactly 6 months since that chaotic Friday afternoon at the gate. Marcus did not end up going to federal prison, but his life as he knew it was entirely dismantled. Faced with the overwhelming, undeniable evidence of the forgery and the damning security camera footage from the notary's office, his expensive defense lawyer strongly advised him to take a severe plea deal. He accepted a deferred prosecution agreement to avoid a trial. As part of the terms, he had to formally withdraw the fraudulent notice of interest from the county records, pay every single cent of my exorbitant legal fees to Victoria Sterling, and complete 3 grueling years of supervised probation. But the real, lasting punishment was the absolute destruction of his grand illusion. The felony fraud charges made the local news in the city's business section. His wealthy investors immediately pulled out of all his projects. His fake eco-retreat startup collapsed instantly before it ever launched. Elaine couldn't handle the massive public humiliation of not being a wealthy boss babe anymore. Without his leased cars and his fake money, she filed for divorce 2 months later. The custody battle was vicious. She took the kids and moved entirely out of state to live in her parents' basement. Marcus was forced to move into a tiny, run-down 2-bedroom apartment that constantly smelled like old cigarettes and regret. As for my parents, the angry silence lasted for almost 5 full months. I spent the Thanksgiving holidays entirely alone at the cabin. I didn't have to listen to Marcus brag about his imaginary wealth. I didn't have to watch my mother fawn over him. I grilled a massive steak for myself, drank a glass of bourbon on the porch, and it was without a doubt the best meal I had ever had. But last month, my mother finally called me again. I didn't want to answer it, but some morbid sense of closure made me pick up the phone. Her voice wasn't angry anymore. It was incredibly small. It was broken and fragile. She didn't scream at me or demand that I drop the lawsuit. Instead, she cried quietly into the receiver and asked if she could borrow $500 to pay her winter heating bill. And then, she revealed the final, utterly pathetic twist of this entire tragic family saga. "We lost everything, Julian," she whispered through the phone, her voice shaking. "Your father? He took out a second massive mortgage on our house, just to pay for Marcus's defense lawyer to keep him out of prison. We completely drained the rest of the 401k retirement fund. We have absolutely nothing left in the bank. We can't afford a funeral, let alone the mortgage. We're going to have to sell the family house next month." She paused, breathing heavily into the phone. She was waiting for me to jump in. She was waiting for me to, naturally, play my old role. She was waiting for the safety net to magically appear and catch them. "When Marcus told us about your big, beautiful house in the mountains," she continued, her voice trembling with guilt, we thought maybe if he got the business going up there, or if you just let us move in with you, we could survive the winter. We knew he was desperate, Julian. We knew the paperwork wasn't real, but we didn't have any other financial options left. We needed you to just let him win for us so we wouldn't be homeless." I closed my eyes. The sheer, breathtaking selfishness of it all washed over me like a freezing wave. They knew. My own parents knew Marcus was forging legal documents to steal my hard-earned sanctuary. And they actively encouraged it because they wanted to live rent-free in the house I bought with my blood, my sweat, and my salary. They were perfectly willing to completely sacrifice me, to let Marcus steal my home, just to save themselves from the financial monster they had created and enabled for 40 years. "I'm sorry, Mom," I said. "I really am. But I cannot help you." "Julian, please," she begged, her voice breaking. "You have so much. You have that whole mountain." "I have exactly what I built with my own 2 hands," I replied firmly. "And you have exactly what you built. Goodbye, Mom." I hung up the phone. I didn't wait for her to cry again. I finally went into my smartphone settings, blocked her number, blocked my father's number, and blocked Marcus forever. I completely severed the rotting limb of my family tree so that I could finally survive and grow. I am sitting on the wraparound porch of my cabin right now as I tell you this entire story. The sun is setting slowly over the 50 acres of virgin forest that belong entirely to me. I've learned a lot about this mountain over the last 6 months. I've learned that the creek rises exactly 2 inches after a heavy summer rain. I've learned that Mr. Harrison makes an incredible smoked brisket on Sundays. And I've learned that the little bird singing in the eastern tree line is called a wood thrush. I looked it up in a book. A wood thrush will fly thousands of miles to migrate across the continent, but if the habitat is safe, if the environment is protected from predators, it will return to the exact same tree year after year to build its nest. I keep my habitat incredibly safe now. People always ask me in the comments if I feel guilty, if I feel bad that my brother is on probation, going through a bitter divorce, and my parents are struggling to survive. The honest, brutal answer is no. Intelligence isn't just about knowing facts or having a college fund. Real intelligence is applying what you know to your own life to ruthlessly protect your peace. My careful choices compounded over 11 years of hard work to give me a heavy deed with my name alone on it. Their careless choices compounded over 11 years of enabling and greed to give them a pair of police handcuffs and an empty bank account. Neither outcome was an accident. Both were perfectly earned. Family is not a blank check. Blood does not automatically entitle someone to your money, your sanity, your real estate, or your home. If the people who are supposed to love you only value you for what you can financially provide for them, they aren't your family. They are your employers, and you have every single right in the world to quit your job. Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Build your habitat and protect it with everything you have.